This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 313, DevPanel. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about DevPanel with Salim Lakhani. Saleem is the CTO and co-founder of DevPanel, a DevOps control panel for Drupal. He helps companies migrate their applications and sites to a cloud-native infrastructure on AWS. He joins us virtually today from beautiful Denver, Colorado, where he lives with his wife and daughter. Saleem, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm Nick Laughlin, and today my co-hosts are, as usual, John Picozzi. What's new with you this week?
Oh, so what is new with me this week? All the things are new, but the top of the list right now, I wanted to put a shout out there that the New England Drupal camp is going virtual. I know people are sad because it was supposed to be in person, but the organizing team did the mature thing and decided to go virtual this year for the health and safety of the community. So we are going virtual. We're keeping it on November 19th. We are reusing the BoffCon format from last year. And we are going to have BoffCon, and then we're also going to have a track dedicated to Drupal newcomers. So we're going to have a training in the morning on getting started with Drupal, and then Boffs in the afternoon for Drupal newcomers to be able to ask questions and kind of get up to speed on different aspects of Drupal. So yeah, looking forward to that. Registration's open, so feel free to grab your tickets. It is a pay what you want conference, so you can come in there and pay what you want and come and join us. We are going to do a keynote as well. We'll be announcing that with the schedule in the coming weeks. So nedcamp.org.
I'm excited. Also joining us for her second guest host appearance is Tara King. What's new with you this week?
Yeah, I feel like I had one of those weeks that is so boring in a good way. There's no big surprises that are bad. And it was so chill that I got to bake a lot of bread, which I feel like I'm maybe like a year behind everyone else, maybe even a little longer on the bread obsession. But I've been making this bread that's the 5 minutes a day bread. I don't know if you're familiar with this format. You make a giant vat of dough. There's no kneading. It takes less than 5 minutes to make the dough. And then it just sits in your fridge and you can just pull it out, make bread whenever you want. I feel like a wizard. I feel so smart for having this system that I didn't do a single thing to figure this out. I just followed the instructions.
I'm sorry.
It turns out great.
Because my wife and I are very interested in eating bread, and
yeah,
bread on demand. Bread on demand sounds amazing.
It's amazing.
Couple of questions. So you make it; it just sits in your refrigerator. You pull it out, you can form it into any kind of roll or loaf that you want, and just bake it off.
Basically, so like I said, it's a no knead thing. So it takes 5 minutes. You just put dough, flour, salt, yeast, water, mix. Put it in the fridge. And then the day that I need the bread, I don't even wake up early. I'm not a morning person. I don't do that whole baker 5 a.m. thing. Pull it out, shape it into whatever shape the book has. I don't know, every bread that I know of that exists. I'm sure there's other bread. So you can make baguettes, or you can make a sandwich loaf or whatever. And then you bake it up and then you have it for dinner. Cause like I said, I'm not a morning person, so it's never ready for lunch, but, I can drop the link to the original recipe. The full original recipe is online. And then I made that for 6 months before I got the book that has all the variations and
options.
Pro tips.
Yeah. If you could put that in the show notes, I'm definitely gonna have to look that up later. Also, I'd like to thank you because you are on the West Coast, which means right now it's 8:48 a.m. and
I'm
you're
actually
not a morning
Mountain
person.
Time.
Oh, okay.
So it's merely 9:48, so it's fine.
Oh, we have two Mountain Time people right now.
Interesting.
Yeah, we're practically neighbors.
Well, I still appreciate
where are you based?
I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Uh-huh.
So just south.
Okay.
I used to be on the West Coast, so you're not totally making that up, John. But I'm not
Okay,
anymore.
cool. Well, I still appreciate you not being a morning person and getting up early to join us.
Thanks.
So the other guest at the moment that is on Mountain Time is Saleem. What's new with you this week?
Oh, geez. Well, I am helping organize the New York City Drupal camp. It's coming up next month. I'm the point person on the DevOps Summit. I'm stressing out about that, but we have 3 sessions slated for that DevOps Summit, which is one on static sites. And I think you're on there, right, John?
Yeah, I think I agreed to that.
Yeah,
That sounds right. That sounds like something.
That's right.
You need to confirm with John the day before so he remembers.
No, that's not true. At least 2 or 3 weeks should be fine.
Yeah. And then there's one on cloud dev environments, which should be super exciting. We've got somebody from Acquia. We've got Ofer there for DrupalPod. And I'm going to be showing off DevPanel too. And then there's going to be a security update from, I think Ted Bowman is going to be there and talking about, supply chain issues with package managers and stuff like that. So those should be super interesting. And then I'm also presenting at Drupal GovCon, so I'm a little stressed out about that because I have to prepare finalize all the presentations and stuff about that. And that's on static sites and serverless Drupal. So those are things that have been I'm doing this week, and I was stressing out about this interview as well. So I stress out about everything. So
yeah, don't stress out about this interview, this podcast. This is the lowest pressure podcast I think on the planet. So all right, there's no wrong answer.
Yeah, well, this feels like it. So this is great. So this is good being here. And then the other thing I was going to tell you guys is, so at night I like to read something on the Kindle, so I can as I'm reading I just kind of fall asleep. So I got this book that was really cheap on Amazon. It was called Pandemic. So since we're in a pandemic, I was like, oh, I should get this book called The Pandemic, by A.G. Riddle. That had 26,000 reviews, 4 or 5-star reviews. So I was like, oh, how interesting could it be, So I got the book and now I can't fall asleep. So I'm on chapter 20. So I got a book for going to bed, but no, it's keeping me up. So, but if you get a chance to read it, it's super interesting. So get the book.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
So for myself, I've got a quick update this week. So this is something I'm kind of surprised I didn't realize this sooner. But until the past about month, a lot of my clients have been just doing a lot of prep work for Drupal 9 readiness. So we've been updating modules, updating custom code, things like that, running the upgrade status module. And over the last week or so, I've been really in the weeds, just running the actual updates now, moving the sites to Drupal 9, which has been pretty exciting. But I ran into a slight hiccup that I should have realized sooner, but the upgrade status module didn't quite point it out, which isn't their fault. I mean, it makes sense now that I know what it is. And that is, you can't use a Drupal 9, you can't use a patch to make a module Drupal 9 compatible. Because you can use the patch to test it and confirm that it is, but the problem is Composer does version requirements prior to downloading patches. So Composer will then say, oh, you need Drupal 9. Oh, you need this module. This module is not Drupal 9 compatible. Sorry. There are a couple ways to fix it. Probably, one is to campaign to get the patch committed, which might be the simplest. Another way is to fork it and just put that patch in. And I think Damien wrote a blog post, it's on Media Current, that talks about a way to essentially require the issue fork, create an issue fork for that patch, and then require that issue fork directly in Composer. Now, that last option also has downsides. You're pointing at an issue fork. If somebody commits something there, you're not pulling those changes next time you're deploying. So you definitely want to be cautious about that. But I'll definitely link that in the show notes. And it was something that kind of hit me last week with one of the projects that I was working on. It took me a little bit of work to figure out why, because the Composer arrow wasn't like, oh, you can't install this because this module requires it. It was a really kind of obscure error message, something like Drupal 8 requires Drupal 8, so Drupal 9 isn't available. And it's like, that doesn't make sense. I'm not trying to install
basically
Drupal 8.
A standard Composer error message.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to figure, running Drupal why not, before realizing that that's just for updates, not for something like this. And then there's like a prohibits command that gave a little bit more information, but still didn't quite do it. There's one thing that I wish Composer did was provide a little bit more clear errors, like, hey, you're trying to do this, but this particular module is the one that's preventing it. Instead you just get 500 lines of errors saying it can't require every single version of Drupal under the sun. So yeah, if you're trying to update and you're using a patch to make something Drupal 9 compatible, that will not work. And I'll have links in the show notes to the documentation.
That's actually an issue I've run into before, when trying to basically do something similar to what you're talking about. Like, hey, you can't install the module and then patch the module to make it compliant in the first place. It doesn't work that way. So it's interesting that you bring that up.
Yep. Speaking of which, the module of the week this week is upgrade status. So I have gotten more use out of this module in the past couple of months than any other Drupal module, I think. The upgrade status module is a module to tell you if you're ready to upgrade to Drupal 9. It will scan your custom code, your themes, and any contrib modules, and gives you some really helpful information. So it'll say things, for example, like, this module has a patch so you can test it, which is why I thought patching would work in the first place. It will tell you you have deprecated code, for example, in a particular module. It's really helpful. It also helps you with the non-module based things. So for example, I think the way that you include configuration directories change between Drupal 8 and Drupal 9. And so it will check that your settings.php for that. It checks your MySQL version, your PHP version. It just checks everything end to end. Is your site ready for Drupal 9? Pretty easy to use. Kind of just require it. You have to have PHP unit to run scans. I think version 6 works. And then I also had an issue with vendor directory. So I had to add the vendor directory to the composer.json in web, not the root composer.json, because it had trouble finding PHP stan, the library that does the scanning. But other than that, you just kind of install it and visit the report, and it tells you what you need to do. It gives you a handy little, you're 80% of the way there indicator. So yeah, if you're looking to upgrade to Drupal 9, upgrade status is kind of invaluable.
Totally. I actually used that most recently to upgrade the NedCamp site to Drupal 9, and it was super easy to understand exactly what I needed to do to get it ready to go up to a Drupal 9 workflow on Pantheon. So it was easy. It was good. I recommend it.
Very cool. So moving on to our primary topic this week. Saleem, thank you for joining us to talk about DevPanel. Let's start with kind of the softball. What's the elevator pitch for DevPanel?
Do you know of cPanel?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know how it works?
No.
No.
Why don't you tell us? Educate us.
cPanel is you install the software and it manages your server, right? And a lot of people use this when when you buy hosting, you get cPanel pre-installed with it. So you can install software using cPanel, and you can manage your server using cPanel. Or you can do it, manually, which is much harder, right? So the inspiration behind DevPanel was kind of cPanel. Was
Okay.
like, hey, why don't we have a control panel for developers and for DevOps, right? That wraps around your cloud provider account and makes it easier for you to manage that account and you to manage those services, just like cPanel would for a server, right? So
Okay.
and that's why we called it DevPanel. So it was for developers and for DevOps.
Okay.
So that's DevPanel.
So DevPanel does it give you the ability to create databases like cPanel, create virtual hosts, things like that? So it controls Apache, it controls MySQL and all that underlying infrastructure?
Yeah, you can pretty much think of all the things you'd want to do for setting up, for example, Drupal or WordPress, multi-sites or whatnot, right? So RDS, you can set up RDS, CDN, Memcache, Redis, any infrastructure that you want to set up. You can even upload, like you were saying, you're using CDK, or if you're using Terraform or CloudFormation, you can even upload your infrastructure files, and we will actually set up and implement that infrastructure for you. So, and then we'll version control that infrastructure for you as well.
So just to be clear, how is this different from like a local environment setup tool like Lando or Doxel, DDev, one of those things?
Oh, I'm not an expert on local development environments, but this manages all your, we use Terraform and we use CloudFormation and we use the templates that we use are all provider specific. So we're going in there and setting up your AWS account, for example, and we're setting up the services in there, and we're setting up the ports in there, and we're setting up these enterprise level services that you are running, production environments on, not dev. Well, you're running dev and production environments on, right? And we also set up auto scaling, and we also set up, Kubernetes, and we're setting up deployment. So we're basically we're setting up your own private platform. Like if you think of what platform SH is running on or what Pantheon is running on, we're setting up that infrastructure in your account, right? So that's that infrastructure. So I don't think that compares to what you're doing in your local dev environment, right? Because you're just running one, you might be running a few containers locally. This is full enterprise grade infrastructure that we're setting up. And on this infrastructure, you can create, dev environments, or you can create production environments, and you can scale them as much as you like.
So you kind of touched on how DevPanel works with using using scripts from the various vendors and kind of putting those together. What services does DevPanel work with? Is it AWS only, or could you go to Microsoft offering or something like that?
Theoretically, right, you could go to anything because we have certain touch points that we use services from the vendors. So we use like a vendor provided database, we use container services, we use vendor managed Kubernetes and things like that. So we have I think 7 touch points that we need to integrate for each vendor. But right now we're just integrated with AWS. So our goal is to next go to Azure, and then after that go to GCP. So for now we started with AWS because that's what we were familiar with. That's what we had been doing for years, and then they're one of the largest providers. So that's what we started.
So does this include setting up your CI/CD pipeline as well, or is this just the infrastructure side? Because you mentioned platform SH as an example. Does this also set up the ability to set up deployments in YAML like platform does?
Yeah. So we'll set up your whole CI/CD. We'll do in container pipelines We've invested like a lot of time into pipelines, and we are continuing to do a lot more work with pipelines. So you can integrate external pipelines into your builds, and we have in-container YAMLs and stuff like that, so that when you deploy a container or when you update your code, your containers will actually pull the code for you and stuff. So you don't have to redeploy a container, for example. So if you want to do it that way, you have the option of doing it that way. Or your container can pull configuration if you want. So you can run scripts in your container to react to certain events in your repo. So that's one thing you can do. The other thing we do is not just the CI/CD pipeline, but we also take care of like security, and we take care of all the other stuff. Like when you go out and you're setting up a website, you want to make sure that your buckets are secure and all your services are secure and stuff like that, because you're running it on a public cloud. So,
can you add any other sort of like AWS features and services? Like how much control, if you're using DevPanel, do you have with what AWS provides versus?
Yeah, good question. Very good question. So this was when we started, we were like, okay, we'll just do Drupal or WordPress or something like that. But it soon became apparent that there's a ton of AWS has hundreds of services, right? And why are we not using, or why don't we give users access to those services, right? So what we did was this led us into this whole path of, if we can do dev test live of applications, right? Why can't we do dev test live of infrastructure? Because now infrastructure is code, basically, right? Yeah. So then we introduced this whole other section of DevPanel, which is IAC provisioning. And with IAC provisioning, you can actually upload your IAC scripts, and we will manage dev test live versions of your infrastructure. So now it's interesting because you can basically say, this is the infrastructure that I want to deploy, right? And then we will deploy that infrastructure. We can deploy that infrastructure in different VPCs in one account, or we can actually deploy that infrastructure in different accounts. We can actually, you can connect it to different accounts, and we can deploy those in different accounts in AWS.
So you can test infrastructure changes.
Right. So if you imagine, if you have one base application which is running well, for example, and you want to optimize that, if you want to optimize that application by changing your infrastructure, you don't want to change your infrastructure on a live application, right?
No.
So you want dev test live versions of your infrastructure now, right?
Yeah.
And to do dev test live versions of your infrastructure, there's no easy way of doing it, right? And So if you have a control panel that allows you to do that, and you can have your entire team work on it. Now you can have dev test live versions of your infrastructure, and with DevPanel, you can deploy dev test live versions of your infrastructure, and you can overlay your application using the same control panel on top of that infrastructure, right?
That's
and if you have dev test live versions of your application, you can then create all kinds of permutations and combinations of that, right? So this gives you a lot of power for managing your account and your infrastructure, right?
Yeah, that's key, because one of the things that's always complex when you're using infrastructure as a service is it's not just about the end state, So knowing that, hey, we're currently on this infrastructure, we want to, and we know it works on this new infrastructure. Converting from one infrastructure to another, sometimes there's difficulties. So being able to overlay and test, like converting from one state to another as well reliably, I mean, that's something that a lot of environments don't have. And it takes a lot of effort to make sure that deployment is reliable. Because you, like you said, you don't want to start on get a dev environment that's working and be okay, we're ready to go to prod, and then find out that part of that infrastructure deployment process doesn't work. Right. You want to make sure it's repeatable. That's cool.
Right. And then ability to roll back and things like that, those are all built in as well. So just like you could do with application, now you can do that with infrastructure as well. So So we had to, Tara, coming back to your question, I mean, that was a great question. So being able to, just opening up that door, it actually opened up this whole Pandora's box, and we had to deal with this. This was huge, but this opened up a lot of possibilities for us and for our customers as well. So
yeah, that's great. I'm kind of sitting here, a former Pantheon employee, thinking about like nesting all these dev test live environments. It seems very powerful. It makes me wonder how, sorry to go to the money side, but how billing works. Like, is AWS billing separate? Is it rolled into DevPanel? What's that relationship?
So originally we wanted to have the customers, have, some of the customers that we were targeting, they already have like the government and educational, customers, universities and stuff. They already have huge discounts with AWS. So they don't want to bill through us, right? So we just wanted them to bill through to AWS like they've been billing so far, because we can't give them a bigger discount than that. And as a control panel, we want them to just buy the control panel and still enjoy that discount that they're getting from AWS. Because as soon as you put a middleman between AWS and the customer, then you're having to pay a ton of markup, right?
Yeah.
We wanted the users to have those cost efficiencies that they're already enjoying, and we want to pass that savings along. So, but there are some customers that just want to, especially the smaller companies and the mid-sized companies, they just want to write one check, right? So for them, we're starting to, and this is more a customer-driven thing, is that we weren't going to go in that direction, but they're coming to us and saying, hey, can you just manage this whole thing for us? And can we just write you one check and you take care of it? So now we're going into this area where, we're absorbing the variability of the bill coming in, and they're just writing us one check, and we're like, okay, fine. We sell them capacity. They can still host unlimited sites on that capacity, right? Because it's their cluster. We're just managing it for them, and they're just giving us one check, and we're just like, okay, we'll just, we'll count your cluster in this bill, and we'll count your support in that bill, and we'll call it even.
Is that a service offering that you guys offer widely, as far as like, hey, we're DevPanel, but we'll also be your AWS managed service provider? Or is it simply like, hey, you're using our service, so we'll help you out by doing that?
We're just starting to go into this.
Okay.
We don't even have it on our website. And interestingly enough, we're starting to talk to other AWS managed service providers to actually provide that service to our customers. So we would rather stay a technology business and a control panel business, right, and have the MSPs provide that service to the customers. Okay. And but as a starting point, like we're having to set up this model, and then we'll likely hand this off to our MSP partners as we package this, and like Nick was saying, we create processes around this and kind of like franchise this out.
For the listener that may not know, MSP stands for
Managed Service Provider.
Cool.
And maybe a lot of other things too. But
in this case, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's the companies that charge a lot of money to manage a service.
Well, yeah, some of them do, some of them don't. But yeah.
So one of the questions that comes to mind about this is, what are some of the challenges around developing an infrastructure as a service type thing or a control panel? Because like I mentioned earlier, testing infrastructure changes from one point to another, it can be complex, but you guys are like one level beyond that. When you're releasing a new version of DevOps or DevPanel rather, what is your testing infrastructure like to make sure that you're not going to affect your clients adversely? I mean, I'm always interested in kind of the nitty gritty of testing the next level of complexity. How do you guys handle that?
That is an awesome question, man. I don't even know if we've like nailed it all, right? Because we're always like trying to figure out a better way of doing it, right? Because it is complex, right? We have different environments set up. Like we have an alpha environment set up, we have a beta environment set up, and we have a live environment set up. Our live environment, is like 3-4 months behind our beta environment, right? And we have a community edition that runs on the beta environment. So it has all the latest features, and it's free for people to use and for companies to use and stuff. But that's where we introduce all the new bugs and all the new features, right? So that's how we do it, right? I'm sure there are better ways of doing it, right? But we introduce it there, and then we run it for 3 months, right? And then we make a list of things, and then we roll it out slowly into live, and then with heads up to our customers and say, like, look, this is something that's going in, and here's the things that might impact you. And
that makes sense.
Yeah, and the nice thing is, right, because each customer is running this infrastructure in their own account. So we don't have to impact all, like it's not like Pantheon or Acquia or something like that, where we have to, when we make a change, it impacts everyone, right? We're not running one monolithic, infrastructure. Every customer has their own infrastructure, so they can dictate when they want their infrastructure updated. If there are critical patches, then we can push those out to them. But we don't need to push out updates and upgrades to all the customers all at once.
That was going to be my question was, is it a scenario where you guys push an update and it affects everybody, or can people choose to update? What does that typically look like? Just out of curiosity, if you guys, obviously, if you push a patch, like a security patch, something that you highly recommend people to update, but is it a one button update process in the control panel, or is it something where you guys will go in and update a customer when they say, hey, we're ready to go?
Okay, let me back up actually. There's two pieces to updates, right? So one is the control panel update, which is the SaaS control panel. So if we update the control panel, then it impacts everyone, right?
Got it.
But when we update the infrastructure, right, that's running in the customer's account, then that infrastructure needs to be patched individually. And those updates can be pushed out from the control panel as a patch. So if you're running your own infrastructure as code and you're versioning that infrastructure in DevPanel, then we just create a new version of that infrastructure for you, and then you can apply that, and you can actually test that in a test branch of your infrastructure, and then you can apply it to the production branch. So just like you would do for your application, you can create a clone of your infrastructure in another account. If your live infrastructure in another account, you can test your patches there, and then you can push that out, right? Or sometimes it's just an upgrade of AWS EKS, which is their managed service.
Right.
That you don't really have to test. No, you just have to push a button, right? And they will upgrade it for you. So those things, or an upgrade of RDS or something like that, you don't really have to test those things. You can just assume that AWS has tested it, and then just go in and upgrade that. So it depends on your comfort level of how you want to do it, and how each customer wants to update their infrastructure, and
so you mentioned earlier that a lot of your clients that you target are government or university. Do you have any certifications on the hosting side, or do you provide recipes? For example, if a client's HIPAA, what needs to be HIPAA compliant? Is that something that you assist with, or is that still the developer or the MSP has to manage how to make it HIPAA compliant, and you're just providing the tools to manage that set?
We tell them, like, hey, is Drupal HIPAA compliant? We just give you the tools, right? Like, it's up to you to make it HIPAA compliant, right?
Use at your own risk.
Right, and there are like we're forming relationships with some MSPs right now, some like very large MSPs that have FedRAMP, that have HIPAA compliance and stuff like that. So when they do their implementations, that will be covered by them. So
Okay.
and they will do their own audits and stuff like that. But the nice thing about DevPanel is that unlike other control panels or dashboards or services out there, right, you can actually run DevPanel behind your firewall. So you can run it
Okay.
air-gapped. So we can set up a version of DevPanel. We can give you a version of DevPanel that you can install on your own infrastructure. Right?
Okay.
So that way you can keep all of not just DevPanel, not just your own application, the entire DevPanel, the control panel, everything can be running in your infrastructure. So
Cool.
that can run disconnected even from the internet. So that's a good
powerful.
Yeah, that's a good selling point for people that that are concerned with privacy and data security and stuff like that.
So let's pause the conversation here for a second and take it back to kind of the beginning of DevPanel, right? So we talked about what DevPanel is, we've talked about how it works, but I guess I'm interested to know, as a co-founder, Saleem, like what gets you out of bed in the morning? Like why did you start DevPanel?
Oh, but all kinds of things get me out of bed. So I'll give you this short story, okay? We used to work with a lot of AWS clients and consulting and setting up infrastructure and mainly cleaning up infrastructure that was, we used to get like problem childs and stuff like that. So, and then helping people move to the cloud and re-architect them. So, the biggest concerns for most of them were like their lack of knowledge and resources for moving to AWS, unpredictable cost, or like figuring out what their cost will be from moving into cloud operations with AWS, data security, and just fear of unknowns, right? So when we were designing the system, we were like, okay, how do we address all of those things, right? And then so we had to like, okay, how do we take care of knowledge and resources? So we were like, okay, if we can automate 90% of the day-to-day stuff, then we only have to educate them on 10% of the stuff, right? And that's something that they can handle, right? And then we can become their second level support or their backup team. So if they have turnover or if they go on vacation or something, we can handle their support calls. And even better is like if we have MSP partners, then they can handle that, right? And for cost, okay, how do we eliminate their setup costs, right? Because if you're setting up stuff onto the cloud, these projects can run into tens of thousands of dollars and months of work and take teams, So we were like, okay, we can automate it, but for certain scenarios, right? So we started with Drupal and WordPress and stuff like that, and we were like, okay, how can we set up scaling and stuff like that? So we took inspiration from Pantheon and Acquia, and Platform SH, and we were like, okay, we'll set it up like that, right? And we'll set up infrastructure like that in the user's account, so they have their own private version of that, and we just automated the heck out of it, right? And that eliminated that whole setup cost, right? And minimized the and we try and minimize the whole variable and unpredictable costs by allowing users to set up fixed infrastructure. So you can go in there and say, okay, I just want to run a cluster with 10 nodes. Okay, I don't want it to auto-scale, right? And that way you get a fixed kind of bill. Still depends on your traffic and still depends on your bandwidth and stuff like that. But at least you don't have huge variances. And we started using things like spot instances. And these spot instances, if you don't know, they're like you can get those at like 90% discount. So, and they're great for auto scaling and for pod deployments. And especially if you're using Kubernetes, you can use spot instances left and right, because Kubernetes is designed for nodes to fail. So if we use spot instances, then you can get this auto scaling infrastructure that is, at like almost 90% discount, right? So that we did, and then the other thing that came up was observability. Like if you're running 100 sites or something, how can we know? And this was something that, for schools and universities, like how do they know which site, what to build for each site, right? Because you're running this one big cluster. So we had to create reports based on the traffic that each site was getting, so that we can give them a spreadsheet at the end of the month saying, okay, you can, this site consumed this much traffic, and therefore this amount of your build should be billed to this site, and so on, right? So for cost, that's what we had to do. And for security, what's nice about security is that we have one standard setup, right? So we're not necessarily doing bespoke setup for every instance, right? So when there are bugs or patches, and there's always bugs and patches, right? When we find them, we can push those out. We can patch all of them, right? Like we're not having to deal with one at a time. So, and we pre-configure everything, with best practices, and we built in monitoring and alerts and stuff like that. So when the customer knows, we know if there's a problem and stuff like that. So the other things that we wanted to address, right, when we were building the system out was vendor lock-in. And this was a big issue with a lot of people, is like they didn't want vendor lock-in. So we designed DevPanel to be like, even if you, to a point, like even if you disconnect from DevPanel, even if you stop paying DevPanel, all your sites keep running in your account, right? Nothing goes down, right? So this was a huge benefit for some customers, and this was like, this was a relief for some customers, knowing that if they ever like wanted to, sever their contract or not work with us, right? We're not taking down their sites, right? So it's not just open source, or it's not just, open system, but even if they use our system and they stop paying us, their sites keep running, right? We try and reduce integration barriers by, letting them put in their own infrastructure files. So if they have particular infrastructure that they want to run, that their other applications are running in, they can actually bring that infrastructure in to their existing systems or to their new systems. And we try and provide, increased observability. Like everything is running in their account, so they have full transparency. Like we're not trying to hide anything. So that's, I know that seems like a long answer, but that was a short answer.
So, I mean, in a nutshell, it sounds like, you started DevPanel to make AWS more accessible to people and to make it easier to manage these infrastructures, right? Because you were seeing a lot of people having the same sorts of issues, and basically found a way to simplify it and become a trusted partner to help people on their AWS journey, right?
That's well put, John. That's we should have you do our marketing stuff.
Well, I don't know about, let's not get crazy, but I think
no,
that's
well
the gist.
Yeah.
That's the gist I got from what you just said.
I think you hit that on the spot. So yeah, it was mainly scratching our own itch, but it was also putting a system out there that would actually help the customers, help people onboard people properly, right? And it takes care of security and everything. So.
And you guys are you're being fair and just about it, right? Because a lot of service providers would say like, hey, if you discontinue your service, like, things may break, things may not work, and it might be like doom and gloom, right? Whereas you guys are saying like, listen, if you discontinue your service, you're not going to have all the benefits of DevPanel, but everything will still work. Everything will still run. It just, you won't have the tools that your team may be accustomed to, and there may be other processes that you'd have to run manually. So, I think there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, and when we designed it, it was like, how do I want to be treated? As an individual, right? Like how do you want to be treated? Right. And that, if you keep that in mind, like that's how we wanted to design it for our customers. Like if I was buying a service, like this is how I would want to be treated, right? So that's what we designed it as. It might not make the best business sense. I don't know, but I don't know. I'm not great at that sometimes, but
I think it's fine.
I was going to jump in and ask about open source and DevPanel. Is DevPanel itself open source, or is it built on open source tools?
So everything we run in the user's account is open or open source. Again, to the point that even if they disconnect their account from us, everything keeps running, right? But when we're using things like AWS, some of those AWS things are not open source, right? Like those AWS services, and we try and push all, like if AWS provides a managed service for something like Memcache, right? We're not running Memcache in the cluster ourselves. We could, right? But we use the AWS service because it's more reliable, right? We're not running the database in the cluster ourselves. We use RDS Aurora because it's more reliable and it's faster, right? And you don't have to wake up in the middle of the night to fix anything, right? So we push everything as much as we can to AWS managed services, right? And if we port to Azure, for example, we would push everything to as much as we could to Azure managed services, so that we're not having to wake up in the middle of the night, and the customer doesn't have to wake up in the middle of the night. The MSP doesn't have to wake up in the middle of the night trying to figure out what broke and what has to be fixed, right? So some of these things, some of them are open, some of them are not open, right? So can we say, like, is it all open source? Kubernetes is open, right? Drupal is open. Everything, all the scripts that we run in the user's accounts, open. They're all like AGPL or GPL3, and but are they all? They're all open to the extent that what matters is that if you disconnect from DevPanel, will your stuff keep running? And I can go back and say, we can go back and say, yes, you can sleep at night knowing that if you ever have to disconnect, if you ever cannot pay your bills, right, and you have to cut back, your stuff will keep running.
Okay, and the DevPanel, the panel portion is open source, just to clarify. Not the underlying infrastructure necessarily, but the cPanel, if you will, the DevPanel is open source.
The control panel, the UI and stuff like that,
yeah,
that's closed source. So we work on that ourselves, but everything that we manage, right, all the scripts that we manage, all the things that we deploy in your account, that's all open source.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
So we've been kind of getting bits and pieces of all the features of DevPanel, and it sounds great. Is there a list of like all the features available, or short rundown of all the current features for DevPanel?
I wish there was, man. I can give you a high level summary, right? And we're constantly even behind on our website, updating our website too, right? But the high level summary is, we set up, manage, we take care of setup, management, deployment of infrastructure and application, and disaster recovery, right? And the disaster recovery was a bonus, because when we got to the point where we realized that we could deploy infrastructure and applications, we could redeploy infrastructure in any account, right? And we can redeploy layers of application on top of that infrastructure, right? and if you have backups, right, data for those applications or whatever, right, then if you ever get hit by malware or supply chain attack or whatever, right, if you're ever in a situation where your application goes down or is compromised and you cannot rely on it, right, then you can actually shut down that account and recreate everything in a brand new account. Use DevPanel to redeploy your infrastructure, use it to redeploy your application, and then restore from backups. And you have a brand new version of your application. It might be a few days behind or whatever it is, right? You have a brand new version of your application in a brand new account. And that was powerful for disaster recovery. And we didn't even realize it. That was one of the customers that brought it up. And they had to use it for situations. So. So this was that's like at the high level, it's you can use it for infrastructure management, application management, and for disaster recovery, right? So that's the high level feature set. And again, some of these things like disaster recovery, it was a surprise to us as well, and we're like, hey, that's cool. So from the control panel perspective, right? You can use it to deploy to Kubernetes, which we actually set up in your account. But you can also use it. We've written scripts so that you can use for example, the community version to deploy to your own Lightsail servers, which are like these $5 servers. So there were some developers that came to us and said, look, we can't afford to set up this $300-400 base infrastructure in our account. We just want to use DevPanel and then take what we develop and deploy it to our, $5 servers on Lightsail, which you can't do with Pantheon and other stuff, right? So we said, okay, fine, you can use the community version or you can use our dev environment, right? Our demo environment, develop your site, and then from the demo environment, you can actually just pull your site into your Lightsail servers. So you can do that. We're actively working on creating ability for users to create their own static sites. So when they have that, you'll be able to create static sites from it as well. And the whole workflow of creating dev, test, live sites, which is the live would be your editorial site sitting behind the firewall. And when you push a button, it creates a static site, goes outside the firewall. The application, so that's infrastructure setup management is for Kubernetes and to Lightsail servers. The application management from the feature set, you can deploy application from repos. You can create application templates. We call them quick start templates. And so we have templates set up for things like OpenSocial, OpenY, and CiviCRM. And these are like one-click startups. But the nice thing about the way we set up templates is that if you have your own distro or if you have your own application, you can create your own quick start, and you can give that URL to somebody else, and they can create their own copy of that application on DevPanel in their own account, and then they can modify it from there. The place we're going to is that once you create a quick start, you should be able to sell it as well, or you should be able to create your own SaaS platform on DevPanel, so you can sell your application as a service. So that's kind of the long-term goal for that. And then from the control panel, the other thing you can deploy are Helm charts, because we do everything using Kubernetes. Are you familiar with Helm charts?
No, I was going to ask.
So Helm, so in Kubernetes, Helm is the Kubernetes package manager. And if you go to artifacthub.io, you can search for Drupal. Helm is basically the package manager for Kubernetes. And when you deploy Helm chart, it'll deploy not just one component. It can deploy a lot of different components together, right? So you can, there are Helm charts for Solar, for Memcache, for Redis, for Drupal, for WordPress, for whatever, right? So you can actually take these Helm charts and deploy those using DevPanel as well. So you're not limited to what we offer, Drupal, WordPress, and things like that, right? You can take any Helm chart and deploy that. So that's essentially the feature set at a high level, is that you can use it for setting up infrastructure and deployment of applications. But when it comes to deployment of applications, you can create your own applications, manage them, or you can take any of the applications, thousands of applications that people have created Helm charts for, and deploy those.
So looking at that feature set and thinking into the future, what improvements are on the roadmap for DevPanel? And does DevPanel have a roadmap, and is it publicly available?
We have a roadmap. It changes a lot. It is not publicly available. We're still a young company. We're working with our customers, and then it's very much customer driven, right?
Sure.
But some of the things that I can tell you are things like some things that we're changing, right? One of the big things that we're changing, and it's more like MSP driven, as we're creating partnerships with hosting companies, with agencies, with service providers. They've come to us and they've said that make your pricing model usage based, right? So free to start, right? And then make it like, and we're still figuring this out. So this is going to be a big change. It's like, okay, how do we build? It's going to be like, it'll be a percentage of your AWS bill maybe, or it'll be like, X dollars per user, or maybe a combination of those or something. So it'll be more usage based. So if you're not using it as much, you don't pay for it that much. But if you're using it a lot, then you're going to pay for it proportionally. So that's going to be something that's going to come. But I think that'll be fair to people, so they can get started. They can enter at a very low level. Yeah. Everything is still in their account, and they can try it out. They can use it, and as they grow, then they start paying more. But
it mimics the AWS price model, right?
Right. And right now we have like very steep steps right now. There's an entry level is quite high, and then.
Do you share the roadmap with your clients?
Yeah, we share them, like, they know like what we're working on and when it's going to get deployed, and when things get bumped down, because some clients want to pay for certain features. Sure. So those get prioritized. So
makes sense.
Yeah, so the roadmap changes based on who wants to pay for what, right? So it's very fluid like that. So organizationally, the pricing model's going to be changing, I think this week, because we're in big discussions about that, and we're partnering with a bunch of companies for them to take DevPanel to their customers, and
okay.
Then we're going to be offering, like I said, we're going to be offering managed hosting, because customers have come to us and they said, look, we just want to pay one bill, right?
Yeah.
And some people are like, we just want one server in a cluster, right? And we'll pay you like a few $100s or something like that. And we want as many sites as we can put in the server. We don't want to pay by page views. We don't want to pay by, because right now everybody's paying by page views or something like that, right? So they're like, we don't want to pay by site. We don't want to pay by page view. We just want to pay by server, right? And some customers are like, we just want to pay by cluster. We'll pay you X dollars. You manage the cluster. you take care of everything. We want to be able to put unlimited sites on that cluster. We want to be able to, like, we'll pay for traffic, we'll pay for bandwidth. We don't want to pay for page views. So those are the things that we're, managed hosting is coming. From a technology side, we're investing a lot into serverless, and that includes static sites, right?
Okay.
Because we think that majority of the sites can be static sites, right? And with static sites, there's a lot of benefits. Not only can your hosting costs go down, right? They scale really well, their performance is really good, but the security implications of static sites, I mean, my God, think about that, right? Like, if there's a patch that comes out, your editorial site is sitting behind the firewall, right? Your static site is outside the firewall. You don't have to patch it. You don't have to worry about patching it, unless you have, people inside your firewall that could compromise your site, right? But if your static site is what's running it, it's amazingly effective and efficient, right?
And from a disaster recovery process too, like, say something happened to the server that the static site is coming from, or something, because you're not using a CDN for whatever weird reason, recovering a static site is much easier. Like, you have the static site, you just put it somewhere else and it's good to go. Like, you don't have to worry about PHP versions, you don't have to worry about MySQL. Like, you have the static site, you put it somewhere accessible to the internet, and you're recovered.
And we actually use S3, so you can version your static sites, and we use CDN on top of that. So you've got S3, which is, I don't know, what is it, 9 nines or something like that, availability and reliability or something like that. So it's crazy, how reliable and available S3 is, right? And for those who don't know, S3 is the object storage for AWS. It's a simple, what is it?
Storage service.
Simple storage service. And the CDN, which is their content delivery network, sits on top of S3, and it's a global edge delivery for all the pages and all the content. So that makes it super fast, super efficient, and super cheap for you to run static sites. And there is no server behind it, except for the editorial server where your editors will go in and update the sites. So that's a big thing from a technology point, is we're investing a lot into serverless. And even, Kubernetes is serverless, right? Because you're not having to manage servers. Servers come and go. So we've already got Kubernetes serverless, running on Kubernetes, with Kubernetes. And then with the introduction of static sites is going to be just another level. And by the way, those two presentations are going to be at New York Drupal Camp and Drupal GovCon. So if you want to know more about that, then come join us there. And then we're also investing a lot in compliance and how we can run DevPanel better in air-gapped environments. So there's some issues still there on how you can actually take DevPanel, put it in an air-gapped environment, but then how do you release patches to it, and how do you do testing on it, how do you do support on it, and stuff like that. So those things still need to be figured out, and we're working with people on figuring out how to do that. So those are things on the roadmap. There's some other things we're doing with pipelines, like in-container pipelines and integrating with other providers and things like that.
I was going to say, I've got a question for you. So I know DevPanel itself is closed source, but we were looking at the website and I noticed that the company is a public benefit corporation. And I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about what it's like to run one, work for one.
We're based around transparency. So transparency for our customers, for our employees, for our contractors, for all our stakeholders. And one of the basic tenets is that if anything happens to us, or like I said, if the customers don't want to pay us or anything like that, the sites will continue to work on their environments. And this is something that we didn't want to take away from our customers. And it was that was one of the things that differentiates us. So that was one of our tenets, is that we want to make sure that that is the benefit that our customers get working with DevPanel.
So fair to say you guys are working for the benefit of the people as opposed to the benefit of the company?
That is the intention. That is the intention, is to create a service that people can use and that people can rely on, and if they don't like it, they can discontinue, but still we will not take revenge on it. we will not hold them hostage. That is I think that is the basic tenet, is that always do good, right? Like never do bad, right? So
sounds good. Well, Saleem, thank you for joining us. It's been fascinating learning about DevPanel. I always love to see these type of projects where you're kind of pushing the envelope a little bit and making my life as a developer easier. Setting up infrastructure can be painful at times, and having a tool that makes it more streamlined and more reliable is always welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me. I just have one thing to put out there,
Sure.
if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're working for creating on these static sites. So one thing we ran into is we want to create a service that takes. There's a lot of Drupal 7 sites out there, and
Yes.
and we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could take these Drupal 7 sites and have a service that would convert these Drupal 7 sites into static sites, right? So we want to do that. We want to put that out there, but we ran into some issues, is that there's no static search module that works with Drupal 7. There's an Algolia module that works with Drupal 8 and Drupal 9. It does not work. The Drupal 7 version is broken. So if there's anyone out there that wants to make it work, or make a Lunar module to make static site search work, that would be awesome. And we would love for to work with some folks on that. And if you have a bunch of Drupal 7 sites, we can even work on a proof of concept or something like that with you to get that rolling. Because when you create a static site, the thing that's missing today, we can convert Drupal 7 sites into static, but we're not there on getting search working yet. So we need help with that from the Drupal developers. So anyways, that was my one thing that I wanted to put out there.
I don't know. That'd be great to being able to convert would be a great thing. I mean, I'm in the process of talking to all my Drupal 7 clients and saying, like, okay, you've had enough time to upgrade. Do we need to upgrade or move on?
Right, and the problem there is that a lot of times, these sites were created at a time when they had budgets, right? Now they don't have budgets, right? And then what do you do with these sites, right? And you don't have the budget to recreate the site in Drupal 8 or Drupal 9 or whatever, right? So instead of doing that, I think, like, if there was a service to just convert them into a static site and still keep the Drupal 7 site in behind the firewall, right? So you can still go back and update it if you wanted to. Right? I think that'd be something that'd be a huge service to the community.
Yeah. So for the right price, that would be adopted massively, pretty much immediately, I would imagine. I mean, that's I've been considering converting a couple of the bigger Drupal 7 sites that are they don't see a lot of activity as far as content entry anymore. I've been considering just moving them to static sites if they don't want to rebuild them. Yeah. But if there's a service that does that kind of thing securely, those clients would be top of the list.
Yeah. No, we're almost there. We have that. We don't have the search working. Yeah. So if anybody's interested in doing that with us, then contact us.
Sounds
Contact
good.
me on Slack or, from our contact page or whatever.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal or via email at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel. If you are interested in show news and updates, sign up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
You can promote your Drupal camp on Talking Drupal. You can learn more about this at talkingdrupal.com/camp promo.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support's greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button in the sidebar.
Thank you again, Saleem, for joining us. If our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, you kind of gave a prelude to this, but if our listeners had questions for you, what would be the best way for them to get in touch?
On Slack, I'm at Saleem on Drupal Slack. You can also just contact me from DevPanel/contact. And or email me sl@devpanel.com.
Perfect. And John, if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you?
You can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi, as well as Drupal.org. And if you are looking for a new gig and you are interested, you can go to EPAM's website, epam.com, and you can apply for a new job.
And Tara, if our listeners had questions for you, how could they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I am Sparkling Robots on all the major social media and Drupal.org, Drupal Slack. You can also email me at tara.king@automatic.com. That's 2 T's in automatic. But Sparkling Robots is pretty reliable.
And listeners can reach me at Nixvan, NICXVAN, pretty much everywhere.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.